The meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee is called. I just found out 10 minutes ago that I'm in charge of it again today. So the first item is Amy Lowell's update on the offshore outfall and pending environmental notification form.
Sorry, I just turn on my cell phone ringers. Okay. Hello. Thank you for letting me speak today. I wanted to give, it's been a while, so I wanted to give a presentation on the outfall update. There's been a lot of progress, and also give you a preliminary view on the project in notification form, the environmental notification form, which is the start of the environmental impact review process for the outfall. I will want to come back at, I hope, the next meeting to officially provide the environmental notification form ahead of the meeting and ask you to consider voting that, recommending that the select board pass that along to the state. But we'll talk more about that at the end. At this point, I'll start with the background, the update. So we are completing, this summer, we're completing the 2-year baseline monitoring program in Nantucket Sound. So that consists of two sets of detailed benthic surveys, 2 in 2024 and 2 in 2025. One was done in June and the other will be completed this August. The eelgrass surveys, we've done a number of them now using different pieces of equipment, different measurement techniques, and we met with the Mass DEP and the Coastal Zone Management about those surveys, and they were very happy with the information and felt that it was supplementing the information that they get from their eelgrass surveys that they conduct. So the last of those eelgrass surveys is supposed to be occurring this week. I'll know more tomorrow, whether they were able to progress, whether they were able to start today as planned. We are also completing the second year of the baseline water quality monitoring program this summer. So that these are the 3 initial locations that were that we monitored last year. The town has added a location that's called FOF3, that is in approximately this location and is intended to be a cross gradient, upgradient, downgradient, upgradient or downgradient monitoring location for this year. And we're looking at dissolved oxygen, temperature, salinity, pH, water clarity. That's the royal we. It's actually the Buzzards Bay Coalition's data collection folks do data collection in this in the Sound as well, and they are collecting this data for this project. So those are surface and around 1 meter off the bottom, twice monthly, mid-May through mid-September in the morning. And then they're also sampling for nutrients, surface and 1 meter off the bottom, once monthly, May through October, and a couple of times in that in the day. Last 3 hours ebb and first 3 hours of flood. We are also collecting. We have a lot of data about, of course, our wastewater plant effluent over time. We're collecting some additional data that's needed for this process from the wastewater plant effluent and influent. We expect the United States Geologic Survey report on the aquifer effect of an outfall. We expect that this month, even this week potentially. So they modeled the effect on the aquifer of discharging to an outfall instead of to land. And we had an initial meeting with the Water Management Act personnel who regulate the drinking water supply. We discuss those preliminary results with them, but we don't have the public report yet, and we expect to get that very soon, and we'll provide that when we get it. As you know, we completed the marine sediment boring program this spring, the goal of which was to characterize the subsurface soils for design of the outfall directional drilling. The marine boring program did find favorable soils for directional drilling, And we expect that report this summer as well. I don't have the final report on that, but we do know that the soils were quite favorable for drilling. It's pretty sandy out there in that part of town. We've had a number of key meetings. We've had more meetings than are on this list, but some key meetings this year were in April. We met with Division of Marine Fisheries about shellfish area classifications, and we are due for another meeting with them to follow up on that. We met in April of this year with the Army Corps of Engineers about the permits that are needed for outfall construction. We met in May with the DEP and the EPA, both of whom will sign off on or release their own sort of version of the NPDES permits, which is the surface water discharge permit that would be needed for the outfall. We met in July with MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act office, as a pre-filing meeting to talk about the environmental impact report, how that process will work. And as I said, that starts with the environmental notification form. We will be coordinating, we will kick off soon the coordination on Interbasin Transfer Act. And we have been in very close coordination with DEP and Coastal Zone Management. We've had a number of meetings with them. We are conducting and will continue the anti-degradation evaluation that's required for issuance of the NPDES permits. So we finalized the scope of work with the DEP and the EPA and the other agencies on what would be required for that evaluation based on the Massachusetts surface water quality standards and from examples from other towns, of which there are no exact comparisons, but which there are some recent efforts to increase the discharge to existing outfalls, so we have some examples there. DEP's implementation procedures for anti-degradation evaluation define the discharge to a high-quality water, or which Nantucket Sound is classified as quote, insignificant if it uses quote, less than 10% of the unused loading capacity of the receiving water. So, so for nitrogen, the approach for how to look at that is that we're going to calculate the nitrogen reduction to Nantucket Sound from sewering. Obviously, if you sewer all those are large, densely developed areas along the coast, you are reducing nitrogen load not just to the coastal ponds, but also to Nantucket Sound, because that nitrogen load flows out of the ponds and into the sound. We will also calculate the nitrogen contribution from that treated wastewater that is now going back to the outfall and demonstrate that there will, in fact, be a net nitrogen reduction from the outfall to Nantucket Sound. We're also required to look at other constituents, VOCs, SVOCs, metals, et cetera. So we're sampling the wastewater plant effluent and Nantucket Sound, and we'll use the model to calculate dilution, and then compare the resulting concentration at the model outfall point with background concentration and the criteria where they're available for these constituents. The Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act process, it kicks off with what they call an environmental notification form. So there is an actual form with a checklist on it, but then the form will have a narrative, say 30 pages, that attaches to it that describes that the outfall is our recommended strategy for treated wastewater discharge, and it initiates the anticipated, so when the regulators receive this ENF, they review that and help the town scope out the environmental impact report. So they provide feedback on the scope of that report once they've received this. We anticipate approval of the ENF and the EIR scope from Mass DEP in the fall of 2025. The draft environmental impact report would then follow, and the final EIR and MEPA determination, we hope, or we're planning for late 2026. The environmental notification form. So again, I had hoped to have this to you before this meeting. I was not able to do that, so it will be to you before the next meeting. And I'm just giving you a preliminary review of what that document covers. So it provides an introduction to the project and the goals of the outfall for the town, and it reviews the background. We're explaining to the regulators how we got here. The long history of discharge evaluations that the town has done of groundwater discharge, and the 2022 Targeted Watershed Management Plan for Great Pond, which opened the door to the outfall, and why we are where we are with moving forward with this as our proposed alternative. The environmental notification form does a preliminary review of the environmental impacts of the project in the framework that's required for this document, and a preliminary evaluation and discussion of mitigations. So we'll describe what I just outlined, how we're planning to handle the anti-degradation evaluation. It'll describe the water quality monitoring work that we're doing, the eelgrass surveys, the modeling, the aquifer hydrologic evaluation, and the fisheries evaluation that are all going into the report. Not all of this information is available at the ENF now for the ENF. What we're doing is we're telling them this is the plan for the data we're collecting and the evaluation we're going to do, and here's how we're going to get to the point of a draft environmental impact report. We also need, as part of the environmental notification form process, to notify and communicate with environmental justice communities. There are several environmental justice communities within a mile of the outfall location. So that initial notification was submitted to the state on June 26th of 2025, and there will be other coordination and communication through that process. The notification form will state the proposed flow and the level of treatment that will be provided for the outfall, and the outfall location, the effluent pipe alignment, and the outfall permitting pathway. There will be a lot of attachments to the outfall, to this form. The idea is to get the regulators the information we have right now. We have 1 year of survey data of all types. We have a lot of preliminary data. So we want to get this information before them and get them thinking about it and reviewing it so that by the time the draft environmental impact report comes their way, they have a history with this project and are familiar with the work we've already done. There's been a significant amount of public communication, and there will continue to be more. There will be more as we get closer. Water Quality Management Committee meeting and Select Board meeting presentations over the last 3 years. Falmouth Heights Mara Vista Neighborhood Association annual meeting last year, and I'll be going there again this year. T-Ticket Association annual meeting, Steve and I presented there last year. I actually just spoke with them today, and they're not having a meeting this summer, so we're not going to be presenting to them this year. Town meeting, November 2024, and this year to come. Martha's Vineyard Commission, Steve Rafferty went over there and spoke to them in person, and I was there online. Shellfish Advisory Committee, in March of this year, I presented at the Shellfish Advisory Committee where Tom was also present, and we need to get back with them as well. They also attended, representatives of that committee attended the meeting with the Division of Marine Fisheries as well. We presented to the Sierra Club, Cape Cod and Islands group, did the environmental justice notification, and there will be as part of the environmental notification form process, you do what they call a site walk. I don't know if that will actually be in person or not, but that's a required part of the process. This is the most up-to-date version of the outfall schedule. The dashed line, the dashed vertical line through it shows where we are now. So we're starting by showing what we've done, where we've come. And then to the right of that dashed line is what is still to come. So what we've accomplished is the preliminary evaluation and modeling, the modeling of the discharge within the sound. We spent a lot of time with the regulators defining the permitting requirements and how we were going to get through their permitting processes. I would say that process is virtually complete. There are always potential changes along the way, but we now have a clear vision of a clear plan for how to get through this outfall permitting process. Data collection and evaluation, a lot of that has gone on already. We have some town meeting appropriations that will be needed over the coming years. And I'll talk more about that. I think the next slide, talks about the town meeting appropriations that will be needed to fund the next steps on this. Outfall 30% design is one of the things that, so there'll be, I guess I'm going to skip to this for a moment. There will be an article at this fall's town meeting, November 2025 town meeting, requesting $590,000 for draft environmental impact report and outfall conceptual design. This is the conceptual design not for the entire piping system, but of the discharge pipe and its diffusers. Again, not the effluent pipe from the wastewater plant to the shoreline, because that doesn't need, we need this conceptual design to proceed with permitting. There are some of the permits that are required for this work where you really need some, the 30% plans in order for the regulators to review it. So that we are going to be requesting that money at this fall to proceed after the ENF to the DEIR and the outfall conceptual design. So that's the outfall 30% design line. Then the next bar there is the MEPA process, Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act process, which again starts with the environmental notification form and proceeds through a draft EIR and a final EIR on which the Secretary of the State EOEA issues a certificate at the end of that process. Permitting, I have not here listed all of the permits because this would make it too difficult to show in one slide, but there's, we've gone through the permitting process for some of these things, like the marine borings, but there are a lot of other permits to come over the next 2.5 years. The NPDS permits, the two surface water discharge permits, are key permits that will come, we expect, by the end of 2027. We would proceed once we are complete with the environmental impact review process and have enough of the permitting underway to feel confident. We'll request funds for design and then proceed with the design of the project, and then initiate the state revolving fund loan process for the project, and then request funds for construction and bid and construct the outfall. We do expect it to be 2 construction contracts. It's to be determined whether it would be 2 separate town meeting appropriations or really one for the entire project. You can see that I've got the outfall bid and the construction of the outfall shown in 2 different colors, a dark blue and a lighter blue. The dark blue is the early finish, where if the environmental review and permitting process and bid process and all that goes as planned, then we hope to be have the outfall available by mid-2031. But we have been saying, and we will continue to say, that there is some. This is a complicated process, so we are allowing up to the end of 2032 to complete this process.
Does this include the pipe from the wastewater treatment facility to Kite Park?
Yes, that's why so that last bar is construction, and that's why it's such a long bar, is that construction of that longer pipe in the roads will take longer. The outfall itself from the shore to the diffusers, and including the diffusers, will not take as long to construct as the pipe from the plant to the discharge point, to the landfall point. So I mentioned town meeting appropriations. So we're asking for a next appropriation in November of this year. We plan to request a follow-up appropriation in April of 2026, so the next coming town meeting, for the final environmental impact report and to close out the permitting. I'd love to be coming with one request right now, but I think that it is wise to collect some more information before we do that. We really want to get through the scoping process with the regulators on the environmental impact process, and I think we'll have a better number on that FEIR and permitting in April of 2026. And then the schedule that I just outlined shows an April 2027 appropriation for design of the outfall and the effluent pipe, and April of 2028 for the construction appropriation. I like to close many of these presentations with a reminder of that this outfall is a water quality improvement project. Sewering the dense, so each of the dots on this figure is the green dots, or they may look black on a television or a screen, is a septic system. And when we sewer and collect the wastewater from those septic systems, take it to the main plant and treat it, remove 94% of the nitrogen, and then discharge it out to the outfall, we are improving pond water quality because we're eliminating that septic discharge, but we are also avoiding the existing concern and impacts of treated water discharge to the land, and we're also decreasing the nitrogen that's discharged to the sound. So I'd appreciate your questions and thoughts, discussion.
Any comments from the board?
Could you back up one slide? Yeah. Is it worth calling out West Falmouth Harbor separately on your second bullet? Because I think, particularly for people here in town, it's worth emphasizing that our assumption is, I mean, even though they're getting pretty clean treated water, it's going to cease completely.
You're right, I didn't include that in this presentation, but the plan is that once the outfall is available, we would stop discharging to the ground at the existing sand beds north of our wastewater treatment facility, which are in the most of which are within the watershed to West Falmouth Harbor.
And I'd like to congratulate you on this presentation, to use the professional term. It has nice flow.
That is a good word.
Yeah, keep that in mind, because it really does move along nicely. And
Thank you.
I did a super job here, and I think you really hit the points.
John?
I guess my question has to do with SRF funding. So you're going to seek that to cover some of the costs in 27, 28. Presumably, we're going to be seeking funds from the same source for the sewering of, I don't know if it's Great Pond Phase 2 or whatever South Coast Pond phase we're at that time. And there's this new $60 million annual limit, I think. Is there a risk of we're going to need more money than can be actually given out by the state for this?
So we do have to plan that out as far as, so just to be clear, I think you're clear, but just to be clear in my presentation of this, the SRF is primarily a loan. What we're getting is a 0% interest loan from the state. They have been so far and will for this Great Pond Phase 1 project we're moving forward with now. They're also giving some loan forgiveness, but I don't want it to sound as though the state is funding the project entirely.
Right.
They're providing at this point 25% loan forgiveness, which is direct funding for the projects, but then they're also providing a 0% interest loan. They did go after the uproar about the limitations that they put on the SRF funding when they last released their intended use plan. They did go back and change that so that projects that are more expensive than $50 million do not have to reapply in future years. They're going to roll over as they had previously. As far as the town does have borrowing limits and other things that the town needs to pay for. So the 10-year, so as we get further along, we will be coordinating with the finance director and the town manager and the finance committee about how we spread these costs out over time. And it's a question of, right, how much SRF will loan, but also what the town can borrow at a time. So we will have to stagger the funding appropriations over time. And we have it outlined now in the capital plan one way. It may change.
A couple of things, echoing what Tom said. I think it makes sense to me anyway to include the positive impact that is planned and hoped for from this outfall to West Falmouth Harbor and also Buzzards Bay. I think that's important to mention and emphasize. Our friend from Buzzards Bay Coalition happens to be here tonight to hear what's going on, but it is another, to me, extremely important benefit to this project and may help to sell it. Also echoing Tom's comment, this presentation is great. Every time you give a presentation, it seems it's better and better. I mean, and I don't know how you can improve on what's been so good. I mean, I just
That's nice, thank
heard
you.
your presentation Monday night at the Select Board, and it's just so polished. So excellent work by you, and I know a lot of other folks are involved in this, so great. Well done. The data that's being collected, okay, on the water quality parameters in the sound, and also what's coming out of the effluent itself at the plant that's eventually going to end up there, is that data available for, curiosity review to the general public or to this committee to see what are we finding out?
So the plan is to include the 2024 baseline water quality data as an appendix to the environmental notification form, and then all the other data would be in the draft environmental impact report. So that the 2025 data, we don't have most of that yet. It's just coming in, and so no, I can't provide that. But when we publish the ENF, it will have the available data, the data from
And
last
that's
year.
probably going to be end of August, the ENF?
So, as soon as possible. So I think your next meeting is 3 weeks from now. I'd like to get on that agenda, and the plan will be to provide the ENF before that meeting, so that you can discuss it
And
at
then the
that.
next step would be from
For it to go to the select board.
Select Board and
the
then
select board
submission to the
vote
state.
to send it to the state. So yes, August.
Okay. A couple other things. I believe the whole concept, the theoretical amount, let's call it that, for this project is in the town's capital plan, so that it's part of the long range. What are we going to borrow? What are we going to fund? What projects can we
Yes.
take on? And what ones we cannot take on due to funding limitations, borrowing limits. So it is in the capital plan. Is there any possibility for any kind of state, federal, environmental group grants to support some of this effort?
I am not aware of any additional grants for this kind of thing. We are taking advantage of some very significant funding sources and loan sources with the SRF program and the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. From, as I said, from SRF, we are getting, from the State Revolving Fund program, we are getting a 25% loan forgiveness for our current project. You can never guarantee that that's going to be available in the future. They announce that each year as it's when they know it's available. And then the 0% interest loan is a tremendous benefit. And as long as we can continue to qualify for that, that's a huge benefit. I do think that the town is, or you may have heard the finance director and the town manager in their last couple of presentations to town meeting and at select board meetings, they have talked about, because of the town's overall capital needs, wastewater is a big part of that, but there are other capital needs like police station and other things that are on the horizon. The town, there's enough on the capital 10-year plan that the town doesn't see covering all of that without a tax increase. So either projects get scaled back or the town looks at increasing funding availability And there are different different funding, different ways of raising additional money, and there will be discussion of those shortly.
Okay, lastly, to Jonathan's point about, is something else, because we want to do this, we're going to have to defer something like, a next phase of sewering. And to that, I would just say, without this, there's no way to do a next phase of sewering. We need this before we can go further. Otherwise, there's no place to put the effluent. So we'd have to be looking at alternatives on land and all
That's where
sorts of
we've come
other
to, yes.
more expensive routines. Anyway, that's all I had.
Anybody in the audience? Okay.
I had a couple questions. One is, you mentioned, so I would echo, excellent presentation.
Thank you.
You mentioned that the DEP discharge limit defines insignificant as using less than 10% of the unused loading capacity of the receiving water. How is the unused loading capacity determined?
This is why this is a long process. There are a lot of these very difficult analyses. And so that we will outline in detail in the ENF, and then actually conduct that evaluation, provide the final evaluation in the draft EIR. We have had many meetings with the Department of Environmental Protection and EPA and others about how to do this. So I hope not to spend too much time on this now, because it is big and complicated, and it'll be covered in the ENF. But like I said, for nitrogen, it's pretty clear cut. For the others, we have a case-by-case basis based on the type of criteria that is out there and the type of data we are able to collect. We will have a table that lists what the criteria is in the regulations, what the concentrations are in the sound and in our effluent, and what the dilution factor is, and we will go through and make that comparison.
So following up on that, then, do you envision the need, I realize it's premature, for any changes to the treatment process to meet, not so much for nitrogen, but perhaps some of these other constituents?
I do not at this time. There can always come new regulations that will change things. The advantage of having a single treatment plan is that it is more efficient to change it there and add it there than it is at thousands of IA locations.
Right.
But I don't expect having to add additional treatment trains or different treatment processes at the plant to meet current regulations.
Okay. And I guess the only other comment I would make is that I think it was a really important point you made about currently most of the areas we're contemplating sewering are already emptying into Nantucket Sound via the estuaries. So we will now be diverting that, removing 90% of the nitrogen at the wastewater plant and sending 10% back into the Sound, so.
Right, and a lot of other constituents, but yes, focusing on nitrogen, absolutely. And that is an important point that we make to the regulators every time we talk with them.
Yeah, I think you could show that with a real simple diagram, but.
I like the one that I have at the end there. I think this is
Well,
pretty
that's great.
evocative.
That's great, for sure.
Thank you.
Makes the point.
All right. Others?
Thank you. All right. John,
Did you want,
Did you want to take?
I thought there were no questions from the audience. Are there real questions? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. A real question.
There are real questions, and then there are.
There's questionable behavior.
Well, that you can count on.
You have to go up to the microphone.
I'll be very quick. So Corin Peterson with the Buzzards Bay Coalition, we just want to congratulate the town on all this work. We really look forward to reviewing the ENF and commenting in support. So bravo, Town of Falmouth. And bravo, Amy Lowell.
Hilda.
It's not all about me. It's definitely. Anything else?
I would like to know how much nitrogen is expected to be released with the outfall eventually, with the maximum use of the outfall. How many pounds are being released?
10% of that, which was just going through the IA.
I would like to know the actual amount.
That will be in the,
When might that be known?
So the information about, just a moment, I'm looking for, so this nitrogen contribution from the new outfall, that will be in the anti-degradation, it will certainly be in the draft environmental impact report. I don't know that will be in the environmental notification form. We will certainly have all of this in the draft environmental impact report.
Do you know right now how much the effluent, the total amount of nitrogen, pounds of nitrogen is released every year?
Yeah. So, yes, we have to report the amount of nitrogen that is discharged to the West Falmouth Harbor watershed every year, the mass of nitrogen that's discharged. We also can, based on concentration and flow, in the same way, calculate the nitrogen that is discharged to the watershed north of that. So yes, we have that information.
Could you give that to the public or to me, and then I'll forward it?
Yes, of course.
Maybe next time? Next meeting?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next item. John Kaufman. Watershed permit application timeline adjustments.
You could have done it. You could have. You could have done it.
All right, so the last meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee, we had a pretty robust discussion on the observations of algal mats in Wacoit Bay and the sense of urgency that those mats indicate to both the members of the board, Water Quality Commission, and the people, general townspeople. So we talked about how can we readjust elements of the watershed permit timing to accelerate at least getting those permits and hopefully accelerate the mitigation steps to make sure that we don't have more algal mat breakouts in any of the sensitive waterways. So what I'm going to show today is pretty simple, and maybe it's doable, maybe not. There's always ground truthing by Amy and Kristen on really what can be done. But I just want to present some alternative way to view the timeline that I've shown previously. And this is the original timeline that shows all the key milestones in terms of when the different nitrogen-sensitive areas are going to be have their watershed permits submitted to the Mass DEP. And you can see that we don't do anything until 2027, and there we focus on Great Pond and Little Pond, and then we kind of work our way east before working to the Buzzards Bay ponds later in the late 20s. So the challenge was, we've got 2 years between where we are today, the red star, and where we anticipate submitting that application for the first watershed permits. So it's simple on paper to adjust these timelines, but I think it's helpful to do that to see, what does it stack up against. We're learning now that there's, potentially some funding issues that we need to think about with respect to the, the outfall pipe. And maybe there's no issues. Maybe it just causes some creative reworking of timelines and mitigation steps. But I think we need to start the conversation sooner than later so we can get, moving on some of these big mitigation steps that need to be taken. Is that better? Yeah. So, the proposal that I'm making is very simple. It's just to slide everything up a year and to move the Wacoit Bay Eel Pond up into mid-2026 with Great Pond, Little Pond, so that we start the permitting process as soon as possible, as soon as practically feasible. And the 2-year period maybe seems somewhat excessive to someone like myself who doesn't really understand all the nuts and bolts of what it takes to create the permit. But I'll argue that we have a really solid foundation from all the pre-existing work that's been done. We have a 2022 Great Pond Targeted Watershed Management Plan. We've got the 2013 Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan for all the NSAs. And then the recent work that Kristen's been showing over the last year and a half on the IA geoboundary analysis. So if we look at all that work, how can we take that information and start crafting out these watershed permits? And I've looked at, there's only really one that's available to look at. That's the Pleasant Bay Watershed Permit. And looking at that, application, that Targeted Watershed Management Plan, it strikes me that we have a lot of the information to create our versions of this that are the essential elements that need to be delivered to the DEP to apply for a permit. So why wait another year when we can really get going, hopefully in the very near future, and build upon the existing work? We already have strong elements of the plan in place with the Little Pond sewering, which is completed. We've got the implementation plan for Great Pond Phase 1, which is underway. We've got, preliminary plans for the other South Coast estuaries that have been put out there. We've got these IA geoboundaries that show us where we can potentially use IA septic systems or any of another whole host of alternative measures, urine diversion, fertilizer management, stormwater runoff best practices, permeable reactive barriers, shellfish aquaculture, et cetera, and incorporate them where applicable to create at least the first pass of these watershed permits to submit to the DEP. And what I'm also seeing with these permits is that they talk about, the DEP does adaptive management, that what you submit in the beginning can be modified at the 5-year plans, as long as you put it in writing and show quantitatively how you're going to implement, the plan to get towards the TMDLs. So you have a little bit of room such that if you don't have exactly the knowledge of which lots would be sewered, which would be IA, geoboundaries, et cetera, you can still move on the fly and sort of adjust as needed. So I don't see the need to wait as long as we have today in terms of waiting until 2027. So I'm appealing to the committee and whoever else are the key decision makers as to what do we need to do to accelerate this timeline as opposed to what exists now with the 2027 permit. And maybe it's talking to the town, state, key stakeholders, Mass DEP, wastewater, Amy, of course, the select board, the committee members, and contractors that are going to do, I think, a lot of the work, GHD, Science Wares. And I also put in Wright Pierce because they're the contractors that did the work for some of the previous, or the only previous watershed permit that's been successfully approved by the DEP, and that's for Pleasant Bay. What learnings do they have they can pass on to us as we try to build these 14 watershed permits at a fairly rapid pace? So what does it look like? What do we already know? We have all this great foundational work that's been done that show where we have existing and proposed sewering, where we have the suggested IA districts. And in my mind, an IA district is a place that not only would be a great area for IA septic systems, but for a lot of the alternative urine diversion and any other technology that's approved or will be approved by the DEP that can be used to bring down nitrogen to acceptable levels. So to me, this sort of map is the starting point for the watershed permit and the watershed management plans. And as I said before, we've got a really strong foundation to build off to start, from whatever point forward, this month, next month, to start building these detailed plans and submitting that permit. And so the new timeline I've just simply slid things forward such that in 2026, Great Pond, Little Pond, and Wacoit Bay Eel Pond would be submitted, and then Green Pond, Bourne's Pond, and then we work our way to the Buzzards Bay and the other NSA watersheds. So it's a limited time. We've only got a year between now and when I'm proposing to start this watershed permit application. But again, we've got a great head start, and I think we need to talk to the contractors and to the key stakeholders and figure out what it is we need to do to get this, process moving. And now I've seen the next talk, she's going to talk about that. I didn't realize that when I submitted my presentation, and hopefully there's a great plan in place, but as a member of the Water Quality Management Committee, I'm not aware of how we're progressing these different plans, and it'd be great to better understand it and to see if it's even feasible to do this. And some of the potential roadblocks that would keep us from doing this is just simply enough time to do the technical work. I know we have to work with revised TMDLs from the 2005 MVP study. We're incorporating the Cape Cod Commission's MVP database. So that obviously has to be taken into account. The monies to support the technical work to actually do the building these permits. I know there are grant funds available. I think we've applied for some of that money, but probably will need more. And then some potentially major issues like coordinating with Mashpee-Wacoit Bay, because it's a shared watershed, and having an intermunicipal agreement seems to be in the best interest of both parties for progressing the cleaning of it. So really, that's all it is. It's a simple, request to try to figure out how can we expedite the process and get going so that we can start doing whatever it takes to start cleaning up our estuaries and making sure that algal mats are not the norm in the future. That's all I have.
Thank you. Does anyone on the committee object if we go right to Amy? I mean, the obvious question is to Amy, why will that work or not work? And it's sort of your next item anyway. Is that all right with you, John? And then we have a discussion after that one?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I have one very minor technical point, John, in your charts. The NSAs refer to watersheds, not to bodies of water. In both cases, it said coastal ponds, but it's the watershed of those ponds that are actually the NSAs.
Okay, so
Can I just make one comment since we broke the train? The dates I have from an earlier, probably a year ago, meeting of when we were submitting these applications, and this is as accepted by DEP when we put out our intent that Little Pond, Great Pond is due the permit application by the end of next year, 12/31/26, not in 27, in 26, and so on down the line. Great Pond, Bourne Pond due the end of 27. Those are the dates I have written down that are accepted by DEP. So I'm not sure if I'm correct or,
well,
but we'll find
move
out
to
as
Amy.
we hear the next thing.
All right,
Let's
John,
do that.
if you sit down and let Amy stand up and everybody else lets her talk. and we'll find the
So
answer.
I think that was terrific and thoughtful. I'm on the same page in a lot of ways. What I'm going to talk about a bit is, so there's an important distinction between the watershed plan and the watershed permit. The watershed plan says what the town's plans are and describes, all the details of how we're going to do that. The permit is a permit, and it has regulatory consequences and for the timelines. So if there is adaptive management, and there is some flexibility, but there is also, when you commit to doing something in a permit, and that then, you're then held to that, right? So I think that what I am proposing, I can pull up my presentation, I'm proposing that we prepare the plan sooner, and that it be a plan for all of the watersheds that we're required to have permits for. And then we can apply for the permits when we want to. Beyond that, we can advance it beyond this, ahead of the schedule that we outlined previously, or we can wait to make sure that we have the funding available and the resources available to actually do what we're planning on doing before we commit to it to the regulators. The town can make a plan, but the permit application is a different threshold. So that's a distinction. So let me just, so I've been thinking a lot about the same thing, actually, not exactly the same time frame, but moving things forward a little sooner. And in particular about planning for everything, having at least an initial plan for all of the watersheds together instead of proceeding with the overall planning for 2 or 3 or 4 at a time. So just stepping back a little bit, the watershed permit regulations, those new regulations were passed just in 2023. And those regulations designated watersheds to ponds with total maximum daily load limits, or TMDLs, for nitrogen as nitrogen-sensitive areas. There are other bodies of water that are sensitive to nitrogen, but what's highlighted in green is what was on the DEP's website with these regulations, and that was what the nitrogen-sensitive area regulations were primarily intended to push the towns to move forward with nitrogen planning and implementation for watersheds to the ponds that have a TMDL, a total maximum daily load limit for nitrogen. So those new regulations required they gave the towns 2 choices, to install innovative alternative septic systems or denitrifying septic systems on all properties in the nitrogen-sensitive area within 5 years. Or towns could prepare watershed plans and apply for watershed permits by 2030. Falmouth committed to preparing watershed plans and applying for watershed permits by 2030. This was what was in our application to the DEP. This was the schedule we provided. We committed to applying for watershed permits in 4 groups over time. And I don't want to rehash tonight why we did the prioritization, but the summary version is, a goal is to spread out the labor and the cost of not only the permit application, but also the implementation and the compliance over time. The other is that Great Pond and Little Pond were first because we have 90+% of the work already done for those. Because those are the 2 that we have targeted watershed management plans for and are moving forward with. Roughly, we were prioritizing the most impaired ponds and ponds for which we have previous planning documents. So that's what we submitted to the state previously. However, we can prepare an overall watershed plan first and apply for permits later according to the schedule or according to any accelerated schedule if we decide to do that later. The advantages of doing this are probably pretty obvious, but I'll go through them anyway. So it can guide some implementations and allow some progress ahead of the watershed permits, particularly with IA areas, meaning you don't have to apply for a watershed permit for the Board of Health to pass an IA regulation that is informed by this watershed plan and begin to make progress using IAs in IA areas. This process of putting together the watershed plan can be used to align efforts between the different town departments, like wastewater division and Board of Health and water quality, or Health Department and Water Quality Management Committee and Health Committee.
As long as you know where the IA areas are.
Right. So this plan would outline, so let me keep going. Yeah. So it would also provide an overall cost estimate and schedule, so the town can better prepare for project financing over the long term, not just in the 10-year time frame, but in the long term. It improves the eligibility for grants and funding. Some of the grants and funding are tied to planning. And it provides an overall plan so that residents and boards and regulators are aware of what's to come. And it is flexible. And I said until watershed permits are in place, as you pointed out, there is adaptive management. You do have the opportunity and the requirement every 5 years to revisit your permits and update as to what you've done so far, and you can adjust over time. But there's more flexibility before the watershed permit application than after. Sewer planning. So I know you all know this, but I wanted to step back and just restate this as well. To meet the total maximum daily load limits for nitrogen for some of the most impaired coastal ponds, we need to remove 100% of the septic system nitrogen load from some areas of town. Not from all areas, but from some densely developed parts of town. Sewering is the only way to remove 100% of the septic nitrogen load. The sewering progress has been hindered and a little slowed down over the last few years by the challenges of siting and permitting groundwater discharge. We've talked about that a lot here. The town is now moving forward with an offshore outfall, as we discussed in the previous presentation. The town's next phases of sewering beyond Great Pond Phase 1 are planned to occur or potentially, right there in phase with the town's outfall being available. We cannot, beyond Great Pond Phase 1, we do not have discharge capacity until we have another discharge site. And the town is planning now for the outfall to be that discharge site. Denitrifying septic systems, or IA systems, well, in addition, it's clear that progress can be made in many of the watersheds, in many of the impaired watersheds, by implementation of IA or denitrifying septic system upgrade requirements. That didn't come out quite right. I'm going to say it again. It's clear that progress can be made in many of these impaired watersheds by implementing IA septic system upgrades and requiring those. In fact, nitrogen load targets can be met in some watersheds with implementation of IAs alone, as Kristen has outlined, i.e. with no sewering. So we could begin reducing nitrogen load to ponds once the town delineates its IA areas and its strategy. Implementation of this would still be via Board of Health regulation. Wastewater Division is not taking over septic system regulation, and this is covered in the Board of Health regulation. But it would be backed up by a watershed plan, which would, I think, help the Board of Health quite a bit. The Board of Health can modify their local regulation over time as needed. It's a local regulation, and it doesn't even, they don't even have to go through town meeting to modify the local regulation. So a draft watershed plan for all nitrogen sensitive areas would include a draft plan to meet the total maximum daily loads for the nitrogen limits for each watershed. That would include where it's relevant, which is not everywhere, defining and prioritizing sewer areas and the phasing and schedule for those over the next 20 to 30 years. And then outlining where IAs would be required in each watershed to meet the TMDLs beyond what is going to be accomplished by sewer, and then outlining other nutrient reduction plan components that would be employed in each watershed: aquaculture, fertilizer reduction, stormwater reduction, PRBs if they're going to happen, at urine diversion, etc. The Board of Health can always say that IEAs belong in additional areas beyond that, and they can apply it in areas outside of the nitrogen sensitive areas. But this provides the framework to meet the total maximum daily loads, which is what we're required to do under the watershed permit regulations. This watershed plan would have to account for projected growth. That's one of the requirements. Would have to include a contingency plan, and would provide an overall cost estimate and schedule. The request for funds to prepare this draft watershed plan will be included in the capital plan request at the November 2025 town meeting, so the one coming up this November. So I am proposing that ScienceWares, i.e. Kristen Rathjen, take a lead role in this watershed plan formation. Kristen has done a tremendous job of evaluating all of these watersheds, looking at current nitrogen load removal requirements, and looking at what can be done with different strategies. She would use GHD support, significant GHD support. GHD has a lot of resources, and they have professional engineers who can stamp plans, and they have the GIS capabilities, but I cannot manage this on my own, and I don't need to, because we have this resource available if this moves through the way I'm proposing it. So then I'm suggesting at this time that we not try to get through the final in one funding request, because as always, it's nice to know what the draft says before you request funding for the final. I don't think I mentioned there what I should have, which is the goal that we have described. So in talking about this with Kristen and with GHD, the preliminary scopes that we've put together would prepare this watershed plan by the end of 2026. So that's not quite the time frame you were talking about. You were talking about mid-2026. But there is a lot of work involved in a lot of pieces of this. One is looking at the growth and how to accommodate that. And the other is, sketching these out and then talking to this board and talking to the Board of Health and having public discussions about them. The most important part of this, I think, would be maps. So there's the sewer area map, which we have a preliminary version of, but it really should sketch out, I think, what the town envisions beyond what we've sketched out previously. And then the maps showing the IA areas as well. Again, the Board of Health can always require IAs, it's up to them what their IA regulation says. This is not the Board of Health plan, but it's intended to dovetail with them as far as what is required to meet the TMDLs for these watersheds. That's it.
Can you go back to the slide, it's one of your early slides, that had a table with all, yes. I think it would be very helpful if you used that preliminary map that you just mentioned. Well, but stay there, because you don't have to see the map. And marked with colors or asterisks or something, each of the watersheds that definitely require sewers, that definitely won't involve sewers, and that might involve sewers. And for instance, is it not true that no one is envisaging sewers for Wacoit Bay?
We envision sewers for Seacoast Shores and Antler Shores and Sea Pit at a minimum, and those are all in the watershed to Wacoit Bay.
Okay, so I was wrong.
They're between Eel River and Wacoit Bay. We definitely envision that. So,
But, all right, I would still like to see that marked on this table so that people could point to watersheds where any IA activity will clearly not depend on what's done with sewers.
right, and with any plan, we're planning for a time frame, right? We can't ever say the town is never going to do this. What we can say is within our 20 or even a 30-year planning time frame, we're not going to sewer that area. So, for example, the group D, and for example, we do not envision, well, Meganson Harbor, Fiddler's Cove, Rand's Canal, Quistit Harbor, we do not envision any sewering in those watersheds. And I don't want to jump the gun and have the discussion about what this plan is before we take the time to make the plan, but that's, that's the goal.
I'm just suggesting something to include in the plan.
Oh, yeah.
So people can make reasonable proposals about what you can move around and what you
Okay.
can do. For instance, in an area where you are quite sure, obviously, nothing is absolutely sure in life,
Yeah.
but where you're quite sure there won't be sewers, then you don't need to worry about where the sewers are before you ask people to put in IAs.
Exactly.
If it's an area where there might be sewers, my personal opinion, there's no way you want to tell somebody to spend the money on an IA, and then within 20 years, tell them now you've got to spend the money on a sewer.
Yeah, so the Board of Health's regulations do have some, they're trying to provide some flexibility to address future sewers. It just, I have not been going to the Board of Health meetings, but I've been, knowing from afar that they are really struggling with your IA regulations. And I think part of the problem is that they don't have a watershed plan from, a town watershed plan that shows what's actually needed or needed to meet the TMDLs as far as sewering, or even as far as IAs and nitrogen removal. And I think this would really help. So I think, anyway, it's up. I spoke with Scott McGann and with Jed Goldstone. Scott McGann, the health agent, and Jed Goldstone, the chair of the health board. And I've had a preliminary conversation with both of them about this. And, this is a beginning. So the Board of Health is going to, they'll do what they do. I'm proposing that we provide this as a plan to meet the TMDLs. And it can provide it's an information source for the Board of Health and anybody else as far as decision-making in the town.
Thank you. So let's open it up to questions or comments from the board. Ken, do you?
So you mentioned maps, so I'm envisioning that you're going to have defined sewer service areas
Yes,
for all the watersheds in which sewers are contemplated.
yes.
Okay. And that's not putting a date on when sewers get to those.
We will have to have, in the plan, we will have to have a projected timeframe for that. And it won't all be within the next 10 or even 20 years. So it may be that the town wishes to do, again, I don't want to get into the details of planning now. This is just a plan to have a plan, right?
Yeah.
The town could talk about IAs, interim IAs, that are where the town likely will not sewer for 30 years, or not. I don't.
All the preliminary concepts that I've seen the issue is Wacoit.
Yep.
Put that last for all the reasons you've always brought up. We have to get the force main there, going west to east and all.
Yep.
All makes sense. And of course, the cost. I mean, those are the main impediments, right? If we have to kind of meter out the cost over time, because we're financing all of this.
Yeah, we need
with
a
bonds.
discharge site and we need the money.
Right. The discharge site, now I think we have a very clear picture of how that's going to go. And your first presentation laid it out beautifully. So we're on the way, but even if we get the discharge site, putting a significant sewers in Wacoit, what do you see as the likely time frame?
So that's what's going to need to be in this plan. I've outlined a next phase in the capital plan as being 2 years after the sewer is available. So say 2034 would be Acapesket, and then 5 years after that is the next phase, which would be Seacoast Shores, Sea Pit, and Antler Shores. But that is not the town's official, that is not we have not committed to that, and that's up for discussion in this next plan. That the timing of that sewering and the overall schedule and the financing plan would be, that's the subject of this next plan.
So what do you see as the primary reason for delaying, or why we can't do it quite sooner, I guess?
So we need a discharge location, which isn't available.
Once that's in place. No.
So, and then the town has been talking about sewering Acapesket next for a long time. So if the town were to sewer Wacoit first, that is something the town can do, and we can evaluate that in this planning process. we would need to discuss, that change in plan would need to be discussed and presented to the Acapesket folks as well, who have been hearing for quite a while that they were going to be next. Some of them would be glad, some of them would not be glad. So that's an issue, is just the politics and of making a change like that.
But if you know where the sewers are going to be, even if you can't put them in for 60 years, you know where they won't be, so you can put IAs in those locations.
Right, but his question was about why we aren't, what's the problem with doing
Right, I'm just pointing out
next?
that even though that is an issue, you can still put IAs where you're not going to be putting sewers,
Okay.
assuming that the plan shows
Yeah, I
that
don't
you
think-
need them.
So
I'm not
can I finish
asking
the thought,
about the
though?
IA.
There's another issue that we would need to work out in this planning, which is the design. So you wouldn't, if the town is planning to sewer Acapesket and decides to sewer Woodcoit first, we need to deal with that in design. We may want to build the Acapesket lift station first, so that we're pumping from, or as part of the Woodcoit project, we might build both lift stations.
Gotcha.
Which might make the Woodcoit project more expensive. So this is part of what has to happen. That's why GHD would be involved in this, is we need to think ahead about the logistics and the cost of those logistics.
But clearly
You want a pipe for each peninsula.
What I'm hearing is that trying to do the whole thing all at once is just,
It's too expensive.
it's too much.
It's too expensive.
Right. That's what I was trying to get to.
And there are logistical issues as well. You can't.
So we're, right, and you've mentioned the logistical issue of having to build some of the infrastructure for Acapesket intermediate so that you can convey all the wastewater up to the plant regardless, right? If you were to go in Woodcoit first. But what is getting crystallized in my head is that you can present this in your plans as two options, two clear options. We can do this first, or we can do that first, right? And then,
Or we can have the
is it-
public discussion and decide what's going to be in the plan.
But that way, the public is making an informed decision. If they have information on, here are the pluses and minuses of doing Woodcoit first, here are the pluses and minuses of doing Acapesket first. These are the two scenarios.
Yeah. Yes, that could be definitely part of the planning process. I'm not saying that we're not saying that Woodcoit is changing place on this timeframe right now. We are saying that we will look at that, we would look at this during this planning process.
Moving along.
Developing, I'm going to call it the Grand Master Plan, is a great idea. I think taking a more global look at all of the watersheds and the planning process. Right now, we have committed, and the state has accepted our timeline to submit these 4 plans by certain dates, ending at
Permit applications.
permit applications by the end of '29. So taking a look at them and trying to consolidate it, I think is a great approach, and a lot of preliminary work has been done, but a lot more needs to be done, and the funds aren't there to do that until hopefully approval at Fall Town Meeting. And then to try and put that together in the following year, basically, from approval at Town Meeting, is, I think, a very aggressive
It is.
but doable task. But it'll be A, expensive, and B, it is aggressive. I think the technical resources are there, but somebody's got to pay the bill, and that'll be the town. So I think this is a great concept. I will suggest, and I have for some time, that Water Quality Management Committee should formulate a policy that we would recommend to the Board of Health for IA implementation of mandates. The Board of Health has been struggling for some time, especially over the past 6-7 months, on an initial policy just to address new construction. And that's only the beginning. that would, by most estimates, give you maybe 100 IAs a year, which is a drop in the bucket. We spent a lot of time, Kristen put a tremendous amount of great effort into developing IA conceptual plans, where they would be required, watershed by watershed. We did it meeting after meeting over 6-8 month period, and we came up with 7,000 IAs will be needed to meet TMDLs in the town of Falmouth. The cost is astronomical. It isn't going to get any lower unless somebody has a miracle technology developed. But I think this committee needs to put on its agenda and hash out what we as a committee would recommend to the Board of Health. Help the Board of Health with their task. I went to the meeting on Monday. Only a few folks there. Corin happened to be there and Maggie, because they were talking about their initial IA mandate, which was hopefully going to be promulgated in April, and now we're in the end of July, and it's at the drawing board again. Hopefully it'll get voted at their next meeting at the end of the month, and then we'll go through a public hearing process, notification. The town attorney was there. She had some, I think, excellent recommendations of the verbiage. What I thought would be a 20-minute discussion went from 5:30 to a little after 7 o'clock on a very brief document. I think 20 minutes was spent just discussing the word unique. You know, Maggie, Corin, you were there. I was flabbergasted, but, you know, I think the town attorney made some good points, and her primary thing was, we need something that's defensible in court. And I'm not going to get into the details now. That's off this topic. I was going to bring it up at reports of members. But I think this committee needs to be part of this act and needs to do it sooner rather than later. We already have those maps showing potential by watershed where the sewers are going to be according to the current plan, not so much when, but where, and where the IAs would have to come from, how many would have to be where in that watershed to meet the TMDL. That exists. A hell of a lot of work went into that.
But that's not the plan. That is a scenario.
It's a concept that was developed with a lot of good science
Yeah,
behind it.
absolutely.
And input of this committee to develop the concept that can be part of this with additional refinements. So those maps are there. Those maps showing that sewer zone, the IA that came up from all that development work. So it's a good start, I think, towards this. But this, I think, is a great concept. It'll consolidate things. Hopefully it can help to accelerate the planning timeline, but we've got to get the funding for it. So that's my spiel.
Not from me, no.
Just to address your question, Ed, we had already recommended to the Board of Health a trigger that was related to if you're in a nitrogen-sensitive area watershed and you're in an IA geoboundary, that in itself would be a trigger. Jed had that in one of his various draft memos. Where it sits today, I don't know.
We have never ever, as a committee, voted that recommendation to
I haven't voted it, but it was put in there. It was sent to him. He put it in
I
his.
think we need to make a voted recommendation to the Board of Health. Here is what we suggest. They are the regulatory authority. We are an advisory board. But I think with the work that's been done by this committee and the experience that sits here, we owe it to the Board of Health and to the town to recommend. It's not going to be popular. It's going to be really unpopular. The beauty of it is, if the Board of Health mandates an IA must be in this area within this time frame, that triggers eligibility for that homeowner to get the state tax credit. And that's in the order of magnitude of about a 50% subsidy. Without the IA mandate from the Board of Health, you can't get that credit. So it's a tremendous power that is in the hands of the Board of Health.
We're all in agreement, but it was put into their memo.
The last map I saw from the Board of Health looked almost like all of Falmouth, and was easier to describe the areas that were not mandated. And it seemed to me that the important thing we needed to tell them was where they should hold off because there were going to be sewers.
The recommended policy that was first submitted to the board and discussed Monday night stated the entire town of Falmouth. That was
So you
backed off.
agree with
But, well, that's what they had in it. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I think that's the easy way to do it. But George Heufeld made a great point. How am I going to defend, as a Board of Health member, when I go to court and somebody that's on the ocean in West Falmouth or North Falmouth, that they need to put an IA in when quite obviously their septic goes into the sound, not into the estuary. So he made a great point. So they backed off and said, yeah, we're back to the drawing board on that paragraph. You know, it was a good discussion, but then hopefully in 2 weeks it'll be resolved, so.
Just to address John's point, I think there was a broad brush about where IA should go, but there were more detail. If we were to do what Ed proposes, our recommendation is, when do you have to do this? Is it all upon turnover of property? Is it within X number of years of the mandate of, And so I think that's where things started to get hung up.
Well, that's why I think this board needs to spend significant time and effort and discussion over the next couple of months on what we recommend. IA triggers, possible subsidies, the whole thing. We're way off the topic of Amy's plan.
We're getting too far off the topic,
Yes.
but Amy.
So I think we should let her go.
So one way of looking at it is that the one way of proceeding.
All right.
Speak with the devil.
So we were
yeah.
just talking about you. So one way to proceed, and it's entirely up to the Board of Health, is, so I don't know that we have anything here. We're talking about this, which I talked with Jed about earlier today. The one way to proceed, which is to move forward as soon as the Board of Health is able with requiring IA upgrades or IAs to be installed for new construction in whatever areas, nitrogen sensitive area, whatever areas they want to require them. And they perhaps not in, there are some exclusions. I believe you already have exclusions for plans where we've clearly planned sewer. And there could be, and I believe there also is, an exemption, like an exemption from the requirement to connect to sewer if you put in an IA within the last 20 years. So you could basically, if you got saddled with an IA and then the town sewers that area 15 years later, you get a pass on connecting until your IA is at least 20 years old. So there are ways of getting around that. But I guess what I'm saying is you can move forward with just that requirement at the for new development. Right now, there's, as you know, you've said, there's nothing for new development right now until they pass a regulation. So they could pass a regulation for that, which I think everybody agrees on, and then consider holding off on the more detailed or the requirement in other scenarios until the town has gone through this exercise of determining where IAs would be required to meet the TMDLs.
I want to cut it off there. Even though Jed just walked in, it's too far off the agenda to get into these details of the planning. We're talking about the timing of the planning, and
Yep.
there are too many other things to cover right now, if that's all right.
Okay, yep.
If we start, it's going to take another half hour, which we don't have.
Yep.
Any quick comments from the audience on this topic? Hilda had her hand up first. Go ahead.
Hilda Menge, Hatchville. Stepping back, and this is for the public mostly, we have to reduce nitrogen loading. We all agree, that's why we do all this work. What is the goal of removing the nitrogen? A lot of people ask, a lot of people don't know. Why do we have to do all this? Is it to get the aquatic ecosystem back to a certain level or get the eelgrass back to a certain level? What is the goal?
It's to improve water quality, so it's to reduce nitrogen concentration in the coastal pond. And the theory is that when you do that, when you get to the concentration at this sentinel location, that over time will restore the ecosystem, in particular as far as eelgrass growing where it would have previously grown. That's the goal.
That's what I wanted to have the public know, because there's no guarantee yet. We're doing all this work, but there's absolutely no guarantee that we will ever reach that goal.
Thank you. Maggie?
Maggie McGaugh from Wacoit, and also a member of the Board of Citizens for the Protection of Wacoit Bay. I just want to thank you for taking very seriously the conversation that we had at the last meeting and for the attention that you are paying to Wacoit Bay.
Thank you. Right. The next item on the agenda is, I'm on the Urine Diversion Liaison Group, along with Kim Comar and Brian Horsley and Peter Johnson-Saub, and they asked me to ask the Water Quality Committee for its thoughts on a few issues involved in the pilot project, which is being planned now for urine diverting toilets. And everybody on the committee got a copy of these issues and questions. And Kristen, will it be on the web if the public wants to see it? And so I'd go quickly by the different areas. And I guess I'll read some of it quickly for the benefit of the public. The pilot project is perhaps 25 residential installations of UD systems funded mostly by a DEP grant and to a lesser extent by town money. And the grant that the Mass Test Center received from the DEP limits the installations to sites within nitrogen-sensitive area watersheds where the required 9 elements of a watershed-based plan have been identified in existing CWMP documents. Please don't ask me what that means. Currently, Brian is targeting Great Pond and Wacoit Bay, but may be able to add others along the south coast. Obviously, if he limits it to certain watersheds, he fractionates the list of potential volunteers, because I assume they're randomly distributed over the town. Brian also said he would not want to include any sites where sewer connections exist or will be added within the pilot project period. Does that ring by itself, does that ring any signs of alarm to anybody on the committee?
What is the time period of the project? I don't know that.
2 or 3 years.
Starting,
In the spring.
all right, so that would eliminate Great Pond Phase 1 homes from eligibility. Okay, thank you.
I mean, I'm not sure why. There are some very clear areas where we know we're going to be sewering. We even on the very preliminary geo-boundary plans, we have those somewhat defined. And I'm just not sure why you wouldn't target all your effort on areas that we are pretty sure aren't going to be sewered.
I personally agree with you. I mean, since this is being primarily funded by a DEP grant to the Mass Test Center, it's almost more their project than the town's project. And so I mean, it's somewhat reasonable to defer to what Brian wants. I mean, it's also, the potential volunteers are going to know this, what you just said, and it's going to be in everybody's interest for him to find people who aren't in those areas.
Is the plan available to look at? What this project will consist of? I've seen nothing on it, so I'm just in the dark.
It's being drafted. I mean, part of the reason for, Kim and I are working on it now, and the UDLG and Brian and Peter all have to agree to it, and the town council and so on, the volunteer agreement. And part of the purpose of this discussion right now is to pick your brains to see if we're neglecting anything. Tom?
A key point, which has not gone into in any detail at all, is how disruptive the quote installations of UD systems going to be. We've had a discussion again and again, do you require removal, or the disabling, or just turning off water supply to existing traditional fixtures? Because that's going to be a big factor when you decide what's it worth to the
That's a big
participant.
factor for the study. I wasn't asked to ask you guys about that because, in a sense, we didn't, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't see how the opinions of the water quality programs weren't tightly coupled with those considerations.
Well, you're asking us about what sort of waivers or subsidies might be available, and of course, the idea of a waiver or a subsidy is how much pain is going to be inflicted on the participants, right? And if we don't have a clue as to the extent of the disruption to their lifestyle they're going to be subjected to, it's very hard for us to have a realistic discussion about how we might ease that pain, right?
Yes, I guess they'll be partially financially subsidized.
Right.
They will still be taking a big risk. It may not work. There's a lot of disruption. But by definition, they're dedicated volunteers.
Right, but
What I'm asking is, what, if any of this, interferes with anything the Water Quality Committee has in mind? I'm not asking how to make the pilot project go more smoothly.
well, Hilda raised the
That's
issue.
Brian's.
Steve, why don't you outline
Right.
what you're asking here?
But our goal is to remove nitrogen,
Right.
and I'd love to do it super simply and super effectively, and people would be putting QBs in their houses and not worrying about destroying the existing system and wiping out the cash value of their property and a bunch of other things that could happen, right? And then if the QBs don't work, then we know right away, right? I mean, it's,
Kim, can you answer that?
So, Kim Comark from the Falmouth Pond Coalition and the Urban Diversion Working Group. So it's important to remember, as Steve said, that this is going to be a Mass Tech demonstration project,
Right.
funded by a grant that Mass Tech received. And what Mass Tech is envisioning is that there would be at least 25, there's funding for 25 homes, that those 25 homes would be very, very carefully selected for location, and that there be a diversity. There would not be a requirement that you replace all your fixtures or disable all your fixtures. It would be voluntary.
Right.
So I could volunteer, if
Yeah.
I'm in that watershed, to replace all my fixtures. We are hoping that we get a mix of people because we're interested in seeing behavior. If you have only one of your 3 toilets replaced, what is the result? How much do you use that fixture? How much nitrogen and phosphorus are you diverting? So there's not a mandate here that you replace all your fixtures. We want to try to get a sense of, if people have choice, what they'll do and how they use these fixtures.
right, so that's,
Was there another question here in what you said, Steve, that wasn't clear?
I don't think so. It's just that it's hard for us to think about how we might compensate. As you said, we want a really wide sample of people, a great diversity of situations and settings, and to be sort of formulaic about how we might make it easier for those people or make it more attractive for them to participate. When you've got such a wide range of things, it's hard, for me at least, to figure out how we'd come up.
And the thinking is also that with the $417,000 grant, assuming it doesn't get rescinded by the feds, coupled with some funding that was approved at town meeting, which is over $100,000, that you would be able to do the assessments of more than 25 homes, because you've got to end up with at least 25. And so it would pay, it would be a very generous subsidy. For a lot of people, the full costs would be covered of everything that they'd have to do. The metering, the assessments, the removal of the urine. So it's, you know, it's generous, and I think it's very exciting, and it seems very reasonable. It all seems very reasonable to me. Yeah.
Tim, question, my science brain says if you have a mix of people, and some people don't remove all their toilets, maybe they're very committed to using the urine diversion system, so they're going to have high compliance. And other people have all systems going, so they have no choice. You have a biased study. There should be a random assignment. Some people have to remove all their toilets. Some people get choice. Otherwise, I'm not sure you're really getting unbiased estimate of behavior.
Ken, you're scientifically, of course, you're correct, but the point is, it's Brian's study.
I understand that.
And it's not the purpose of this discussion
But
to
he's
figure out how to
soliciting-
make it perfect.
Steve, he's soliciting input apparently.
Yeah.
And if you have any input, I would make that input, because otherwise, I mean, my preference would be everyone has to remove everything. But your behavioral information isn't really very valuable.
Are you
It's not
saying?
really assessing random behavior?
But we're assuming that some of the 25, some percent of the 25 will replace all their toilets,
I understand.
and some won't,
Then you'll see,
and some won't.
then you'll get a true estimate of how effective this would be.
Yeah.
If you implemented it. I'm sure DEP would require all toilets to be removed if you were going to get IA credit.
Wait, I didn't hear that.
I'm sure ultimately DEP would require that all non-urine diverting toilets be removed if you were going to get IA credit for doing this, don't you think?
Well, I think that part of what is being envisioned at MassTech is that urine diversion can complement an IA system or complement a Title V system. It's not necessarily designed to be instead of an IA septic. I don't think that if you talk to, you know, the folks at MassTech, they're not assuming this is going to be it's either or. It's another tool. It's another way to reduce the amount of nitrogen.
So they're sort of titrating the load, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And I would encourage you to have Brian come and talk here, because I think having him here to hear your input would be very valuable as this, because this is getting more real.
Right.
You know, this is getting more real now that they've got a
Well,
grant.
that's my, I mean, that was just my, you know, if
Yeah.
you want a suggestion.
I guess my
to give to
main
him.
question is, if we grant a waiver of, say, 20 years to 25 houses, some of which, let's take the worst case, some of which might actually be in an area that will eventually be sewered, does that do any damage to the sewering plan? I think the answer is no, but that's a
Makes it more
question
expensive.
to the
There's less
committee.
SEUs.
Well, I think Brian wants to avoid having anyone participate in this study that, in a household that might be sewered.
Right. Or that might delay them from getting an IA.
Right.
And again, I don't see that hurts the town,
Getting complicated.
but
It's just 25
I
people.
want the informal opinion of the committee as to whether somebody thinks that it does. The rest of the problems are for Brian to solve with comments from us.
I think it, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
John?
I wanted to make 2 points. The Mass Tech has a research project which they have gotten a grant for from DEP. They're going to have to negotiate with DEP a plan that's acceptable to DEP. I don't think we need to worry ourselves too much about what that is. In other words, once DEP signs off on their plan, they can go ahead. The second part about what you've asked us in this memo is, should the town provide sweeteners to the group that are participating in this urine diversion project that Mass Tech is running? And I would argue personally, absolutely not. The town, if you'll remember at our last meeting, we were asked, did we think that the lift station and the force mains for the Phase 1 Great Pond project should be paid for outside of the betterment. And we agreed that that's something that the whole town should participate in. And we wrote a memo to the selectmen. I envision what Mass Tech is doing is a research project which will have results. They're going to have to present those results to DEP. If the findings are such that DEP says that they can be incorporated at whatever level into our plans, we then take that into account. I don't believe that to start the project, that the town, and of course, all we could do is make a recommendation to the selectmen about whether they should provide sweeteners or not. I just don't believe until we see the results of the project that we should, as a town, be saying, well, if you go through this urine diversion project, you don't have to hook to the sewer for X years, or whatever the sweetener is. We shouldn't be preordaining what happens until the town sees the results of the research project.
Well, I think that, town meeting approved $106,000 of funding at the urging of the Green Center back in November,
48,000.
and then approved 48,000, I think 500 in April, which was for doing sort of cost assessments. And so I think the feeling of the town manager is those funds have been approved by town meeting for a demonstration project, and I don't think that's considered sweetener for the homeowner. I think
I don't think they are either.
right. So the Mass Tech dollars will pay for the purchase and installation of the appliances, the equipment, the meters, the hauling of the urine, et cetera. And I think the idea here is that we want to learn as much as we can about how effective urine diversion can be, how comfortable homeowners are with the technology. If American Standard does come to the market with a urine diversion toilet in '26, that could be very significant. And if you ask Peter Johnson Staub, who's been, at every one of our meetings and devoting a lot of time to this, I think he sees that there's enormous potential for our town to gain a lot of, it could be extremely cost effective in diverting nitrogen, and the idea that DEP has said that we could take the total amount of nitrogen being diverted collectively by every home that has a urine diversion appliance in Falmouth and count it towards our TMDL goals. That's the idea here. So that's the idea behind the project.
We've got a time crunch here.
Yeah, that's the idea behind the project.
It's not to sell UD toilets. It's to find out if there's anything. So what you're referring to as sweeteners is the waiver period, right?
Yes, you've listed a whole bunch of things. Tell us what they are. And
The
I don't.
subsidy and the waiver. There's nothing else.
I just don't believe that until the town sees what this research project produces, that we should be offering the people who are potentially signing up to do it, that telling them that if they put in and be participants in this project, that they will have available to them certain sweeteners if they sign up, and I don't believe that they should.
Thank you. We're not taking a vote, we're just getting anybody's comments, and I assume that'll be in the minutes. Tom or John? John?
Well, I just to repeat what I said right
You
now.
don't need to repeat it, we've got a time crunch.
Yes, I know, just say real quick, I don't see how right now, given so little that we know about what may come out of this, how we could decide what would be reasonable.
Well, you could, I think the justification would be that the numbers are so small that numerically they'll have an insignificant effect on the nitrogen problem in Falmouth.
Well, I think we can,
But if it's proven to be a good technology, that could have a significant effect on the nitrogen effect and the budget of Falmouth. So you let them get away with murder, these 25 people, for being the guinea pigs. Because it's not really murder, and because it might be an advantage.
yeah, okay. John?
So my question was on the measurement and data paragraph, and I don't know if you're comfortable with me bringing that up. It's part of your page 2.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
And there was, is any other data required for decisions about how UD might ultimately be integrated into the town-wide nitrogen reduction plan? So I guess I'm trying to understand, how does this plan feather into the DEPs? They've got this CES process, a pilot project, getting provisional approval, then getting, the wider common approval. Is this the first phase of that? Is this considered the DEP pilot phase where there's, I forget, no more than 15 homes over an 18-month period will be monitored? Because the next phase is a 50-home pilot for 3 years of quarterly data monitoring. Or is this totally independent of that, just to get some data on the table?
I think it's an influential early step at negotiating with DEP. And that's coming from someone who is very skeptical.
Steve, I believe DEP has made a decision that for these studies, urine diversion is not considered an IA, so it doesn't go through the piloting, it doesn't go through that process.
That's right. Okay, let's.
Steve, if I may?
Yeah, Ed.
I would agree with Mr. Waterbury on his position that putting any other sweetener beyond, the town has already approved a subsidy, let's call it, by the town meeting votes for the evaluation funds, so we're talking, I don't know, probably in the neighborhood of 150,000. That would be it. And as far as a waiver from connecting to the sewer or an IA requirement, I would be comfortable say, okay, you would have 10 or 20 years. If you did this and it worked and you continued to do it, you can't just do it for the 3 years and stop, but that, okay, if an IA mandate is in your area, you would be exempt from the IA for 10 or 20 years. You would have a grace period because you're doing this urine diversion for a useful experiment. As far as connecting to the sewer, let's say you were in the Antler Shores and you're 10 years down the road and the sewer's coming in, exemption from betterment, I would say no. Exemption from having to connect for 10 years, okay, you can delay connecting, but you're still going to pay that betterment. That would be my comment on this. And I think that's all you were looking for.
Anybody else?
You got that. I don't think they should go in sewer, potential areas of sewering.
Yes.
I would,
Within
I
some
wouldn't,
time.
I wouldn't object to some relief from a IA requirement, but
I'm not going to ask for comments from the audience because we have time and because it wasn't asked for. You can send any comments to Brian or Peter. I'm going to switch, if it's all right with the committee, do the minutes of the prior meeting before the members and staff. Do you want to hear any motion on the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes as submitted.
A second.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
I,
Okay. And members and staff? John, Tom?
I have nothing right now. No. John?
John Waterberg? Ed? No?
Couple of just brief comments. We did discuss at some length that the Board of Health is aggressively working on a mandate, and hopefully by the next meeting in 2 weeks, we'll have an initial mandate ready for their vote and then a presentation at a public forum. They're close. The Select Board did get an update on the betterment from Amy. She's been awful busy doing presentations, and it was well received. There were only a few questions from the Select Board on it, and there will be hopefully a vote by the Select Board on the betterment policies as Amy has proposed them at their next meeting, the end of the month. Again, just for information, if everybody hasn't been following, but the Planning Board has issued site plan approval for the lift station for the Great Pond Phase 1. They had their 2 meetings on it and voted unanimous approval of the site plan for the lift station, so that's a go. And the Concom also did a review of a request for determination of applicability and said their rules are not applicable to the 17, 18 miles of sewer pipeline for Great Pond Phase 1. So those 2 regulatory hurdles have been overcome. Done.
Ken?
I guess maybe, Kristen, I should say we got some monitoring equipment when we had a little unboxing party at MBL, and that we hope to deploy in Perch Pond, and where Kristen has sent out her tendrils to find friendly dock owners who might let us stick this stuff on their docks. So as the sewer project proceeds, we will be able to hopefully get some data, longer-term data on, what's the response of the pond.
Will you get baseline data before the project starts?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We hope to get it in, sometime even perhaps later in the summer.
Super.
Do you have a motion on item 7?
Wait, I have
I'm sorry, Chris.
there was an email that came into the committee email address that I forwarded to Ed and Tom because I thought they would be good candidates, but Ed suggested I say. There is a scout who is working on a merit badge from Troop 42 who wants to discuss water quality issues in the town and what is being done and what young people could do about it. So if anyone wants to take that on, go right ahead.
I understood from your letter that he was looking at global issues and not specifically town issues.
It's community. It's the community merit badge, not the world merit badge.
Okay, because there was some mention in the letter. Did you see it too, Ed?
World Merit Badge.
I thought it closed with some emphasis on global stuff.
Scout in Troop 42, working on citizenship in the community. Requirements asked me to obtain information on one issue that a specific branch of local government deals with. Writing to ask what is being done to preserve good water quality in the face of an increase in pollution worldwide.
Yeah, that's,
But it's for what local government is doing.
Did you suggest that he also contact the Fresh Ponds Committee
I did
and
not.
the Board
I
of Health?
forwarded this to Ed and Tom this morning.
Yeah.
Somebody should suggest that to him. I mean,
Right.
there might be a more gung-ho person there.
Okay.
Kim, do you know somebody that's involved over there with the freshwater?
I think you just
But,
got volunteered.
I'd be certainly willing to talk to him in detail about the problems that we're focusing on here within the context of the larger thing. So ask him, you have my email, ask him to email and we can sit down and talk.
Yep.
And Ed, you're welcome too.
Yeah, I had suggested that, we make him aware of this meeting, but certainly, invite him to attend our
Right.
meetings, and also make him aware of the resources that via the web, our past meetings, the presentations, the excellent presentation that the Wacoit folks made at our last meeting about what's going on there in Wacoit Bay, and, what the town is doing with, PRBs and all of the technical stuff, all the actions that are being taken on an ongoing basis for just what he's asking about. And there's so much, I don't think he's had the time to get in depth in anything, but be aware of what the committees are that are involved, what the issues are, and what resources are there for somebody that really wants to dig in on, algal blooms in Wacoit Bay, or the shellfish projects, all of those very interesting and very important projects. And the work of this committee too, that, hey, come to a meeting or go online and look at the old ones.
You guys can do this offline. Amy?
Oh, 3 minutes.
If you're ready, I have another
Oh.
report, I guess. So there is a information session for property owners in the Great Pond Phase 1 sewer project area on July 31st, which is Thursday, 6:30 to 8 at Lawrence School Auditorium. That's 113 Lakeview. And so that notice will be on the town website. We sent out a letter to all the property owners in the sewer area and told them if they were interested in updates to sign up for Notify Me, and we'll send this information out to them as well.
Any other reports? Okay, can
Just
somebody give
one
me
real
items?
quick, Steve, just while we have Amy sort of cornered here, is there any of your public communications things that you'd like us to be present for or to provide backup or anything? I was looking at your schedule and I didn't know. Okay.
The property owner information meeting is July 31st.
Right.
If you'd like to attend, that would be great.
And of course, whatever shellfish thing comes up again, I'll be there for that.
Yes, of course.
But, yeah.
I do plan on attending the informational meeting.
Yeah,
for
that
the
sounds like
residents of the
a
area.
good
I think,
one.
John, you've indicated you would also.
Is it?
6:30
Yeah,
to 8.
sounds like they've got enough horsepower there without me for that
And
meeting.
there are
Now,
very
can I have
acceptable
an
orders.
action on item 7?
I'll move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Can I abstain?
Well done, Vice Chair.
All right.